Welcome to the 4D Talks, a series of brainstorm sessions with people who perceive architecture beyond the 3 dimensions. The goal of this meeting is to discuss what this 4th dimension of architecture can be and how much it impacts the built environment and the uses of the space. The way we live these days seems to be more and more hectic. We constantly rush through days full of tasks and activities. We keep expecting more from ourselves, our bodies, our brain capacity, completely forgetting to take a break, take a breath, heal and recharge. Spirituality seems to be on one hand forgotten, and on the other hand, something more and more needed in order to find balance in life. If we consider spirituality as the 4th dimension, it turns out architecture has so much to offer in this field. Today, I invited experts in this topic, Lydia de León and Arturo de León from Geophilia. Lydia and Arturo design healing spaces, conduct research in this field, as well as teach in their master course how to design spaces for well-being. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting us, Magda.
Thank you so much. We're very happy to be here.
Oh, I'm very glad to hear that. As I mentioned, it seems like we live in a overstimulated environment, and we seek more and more places where we could actually exercise our mindfulness. And it seems like in the past, there were temples and churches to do that. So my question, the starting question is, do you think these specifically designed for that reason spaces are enough these days, or shall we actually try to provide space for this kind of mindfulness and finding peace? Should we actually consider that also, in schools, houses, and restaurants? What do you think about that?
Wow, I think that's a great question. Something we've not been asked in the same way. I really appreciate this question. I have really devoted a lot of years of research having to do with ancient temples and also how we can replicate that in modern times. And I have especially been saying that the last couple of years with everything that is going on in the planet, that actually one of the most important things for us right now to be supported throughout difficult times is exactly what you mentioned. So spaces that have been designed for mindfulness, for finding inner peace, for healing. And I think that's one of the keys to let's say have a doorway out of the craziness that we are living in the world right now, the disharmony and the fear and a lot of other things. So I absolutely think that your question is so important, and I think more than ever we should be designing and incorporating spaces like that. And the last 2 years with lockdowns and things like that, I was saying in a lot of public talks with people that make sure you can create a little space like that in your house, starting with the basics, not even what we do and, geophilic design and all this, just some basic things. Just start with a little corner in your house that you can just sit down and be with yourself and find your, the 0 point inside of you, the same thing that we call in physics, the 0 point. And it can be done very easily, but I think it's so important what you mentioned to have that in public spaces. Absolutely, that's a wonderful idea, and absolutely also in schools and in any space. Actually, for me, the same thing that applies in other scales. That is something that we teach, and the holographic design, meaning that what you find in a bigger scale, you find in a smaller scale. I think that should apply also to what you asked.
And so do you think that architecture actually has a power to be this kind of prevention tool to prevent or to minimize, depression and other psychological mental issues? Do you think we actually have this power as architects, designers?
Yeah, we absolutely do. And I think architecture can influence us in ways we have not realized yet, because we have just forgotten the ancient wisdom of architecture, and we are disconnected from that conscious design part. And I think architecture and design and our built environment can just affect us in both sides, in both ways, meaning it can create transcendence, it can create peace and calm and centering and healing, and it can also create, like the opposite effects. It can create depression and panic and stress and just feeling lost inside. So that has to do with a lot of things. Obviously, it's design in terms of shape and geometry and color and all these things that have behind them now in our modern times tons of research backing them up, like how these things actually affect our well-being, and also the materials and radiation and the location, which is something that I've studied extensively. So combining all that, each one of those has a lot of research to back up how it actually affects our well-being. So if you really understand that architecture is all of that combined, then one understands like the power it can have and the effect it can have on us, for better or for worse.
So to what extent do you think this is something universal? Because on one hand, I think spirituality is also a very intimate experience, right? And everyone also has different healing processes. Exercising mindfulness is a very personal act. But on the other hand, like you're saying, it's actually scientifically proven. So to what extent there are rules that are universal?
This is something that I discovered a lot in my research, and I'll just give a simple example. I found out, like trying to decode what is the sacred science of ancient temples, that I actually have a course on that. And I found out that even though we have temples around the world that come from different backgrounds and different cultures and different religions and different belief systems and different aesthetics, they all have some common denominators, and these are what create the sacred space. It doesn't matter if you have Greek columns or you have Egyptian columns or you have stone circles, but the properties are the same, and there are specific properties that create that. And so those are the things that we need to look at, things that are universal, and there are. So that's definitely something that is already there, and it has been done in our history.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I want to add some thoughts. One is that we live in a universe that is a fractal universe. And by fractal, I mean that the inside is somehow embedded in a harmonic way inside something bigger and inside even, the cosmic scale. So this concept of fractality is what we apply in design. And it's the best way to achieve harmonics in space, or harmonics in colors or in design or in the layout of a space. So that's a very, very important concept, the fractality. And the other important concept regarding your question of how can this be put together, the inside and the outside, has to do with a torus shape. Torus shape itself is the main basic geometric reality of the universe we live in. So water moves in a way as a torus shape. And the torus we are, these subtle fields that you were referring, or this esoteric part, let's say, it's no longer esoteric. We have studied a lot, there are many scientists that they have done amazing research about decoding these esoteric terms, and they're no longer esoteric. They're amazing and beautiful and subtle, but there are very specific scientific terms for all of them. For example, our electromagnetic field is influenced, and we influence, and it can be measured. There are many tools to measure it. And also we have a gravitational field. It is proven from many publications that our DNA literally creates gravitational fields. So when we are living in space, it's not only our physical cellular body living in space, it's also our electromagnetic body and our gravitational body that it's interacting in this space. So That's why for many, many years we've been studying fractal geometry, or it's also called sacred geometry or natural geometry. And what we have discovered among many other designers, architects, that has to do how these subtle fields are influenced. So we go not only into the material world, because we know that the material world itself is 0.00001%. Like if you go inside an atom, it's nothing. It's just about energetic fields. So these subtle parts, these subtle fields, is the one that interacts in space. So what about the materials you're using, how they interact with the electromagnetic fields? What about the proportions of this room? Do they change? And what we have discovered with many years, and we have also done some experiments, is that actually geometry by itself changes electromagnetic fields and changes gravitational fields. It will change the outcome. So this is amazing because you can help thrive seeds, you can help seeds to germinate, or you can help someone to feel better in a room only by changing the proportions, or only by changing the colors or the materials of a space.
What you're talking about is actually mathematics, and like it's also about proportion, like you're saying, forms.
Yeah, I'm talking about science. It's just that there are two types of science. There is the objective science, which measures the outside world, and there is a subjective science that can be, completely subjective, like psychology or sociology, etc. This is the internal world. So what we have done as architects is that we start studying what is in the micro scale, in the microcosm, like scientifically speaking, physically speaking, how atoms and molecules are entangled and how they're arranged together, and how the big universe, the macrocosm, what Einstein was studying, how it's embedded, what's the structure of this. And what we did is that we linked them in something that we call the mesocosm through architecture. So temples and places that heals and places that have transcendence, that they can help someone to transcend, linked these mathematics of the microcosm with the mathematics of the macrocosm, and they put them together. So there are very specific rules, there's very specific distances, there are very specific lengths that we take into consideration to affect and come to a resonance in between these two, these two scales. So we're not talking about only subjective feelings or emotions or thoughts, like someone can have surrounding spirituality. But spirituality is something that can be measured, because spirituality is how you communicate with these electromagnetic fields. So we as architects, we have the duty, or like the goal to create harmonics, harmonic spaces, not only based on some woo ideas, because there are many woo ideas. What we have done is try to do a very deep research about what actually works and what it doesn't work.
And that's, I guess, also why you started the whole master course, right? So that's for everyone who's more interested in this topic. I would definitely send them also to your website and to attend your school and the live workshops and so on. But if you could just give us a little bit, like a couple of main focus points. What are the main conclusions for architects to design with?
An important thing is to understand that there are many parameters to bring together, and this idea of harmonics is, I always like to say, it's like you have different notes, musical notes, and you're trying to bring them into a harmonic result. So for me, this is what architecture is all about. One of my favorite quotes is from Goethe that says, architecture is frozen music, literally. So what we need to do as architects is to realize, first of all, that we are like a conductor, like bringing together different instruments or different musical notes, and our work is to bring them together in the most harmonic result. And what do I mean by that? These different notes or instruments in an orchestra, it's color, it's geometry and shape, it's proportion, it's measurement, meaning dimensions, because it's not just about what shape you have, but in what scale you have it. So the actual dimensions. And then you have materials. And also in ancient times, creating a temple, you also had to take into consideration the stars, like astronomical orientations. And then you have also the location, like the Earth's location. Where is the building being placed? Is it a place that has some disturbance, which is what I was studying in my PhD, like you have an underground water or a fault or things like that, and you place a house and you sleep over that. For most people, because everybody's different and we all react differently to different stressors, but for most people over the long term, that can create a lot of problems.
This is actually still the case, right? I think in some Asian countries, I think in China actually, that like the feng shui rules are actually parts of norms for buildings. So it's taken very seriously.
Not so much anymore. Not so much, because I mean, China is a huge country and obviously there are different places and different like belief systems. But in at least in a few cities that I did travel and I asked about that, they told me that they don't use that in modern architecture. And I asked them why. And it's the same thing that has happened in many places around the world where there is rich indigenous wisdom. The part of the modern culture of these different, I'm talking about different countries around the world, they feel that if they let go of this ancient wisdom, they become more modernized so they can belong to the new world. So they let go of their wisdom and all these ancient philosophies. And in that way, they feel like, oh, it's enough with these old things. You know, now we belong to the modern world. That's very sad. And I was not expecting that when traveling to China. But unfortunately, that's what I saw.
Yeah, it is indeed sad, because there is so much knowledge that we could somehow reuse these days to create spaces that offer possibilities to heal, to recover, and so on. But maybe going back to the research, I've seen you work on studying how biogeometry, which I would love you to explain a little bit more what that actually is. So the impacts of that on people and cells and water and plants. So it's actually a very broad research, right?
Yeah, it's a work in progress, and it's not just biogeometry, but our goal is to have more information and data on how geometry and shape and form can affect different things.
Yeah, and what I wanted to add is that this can be better understood if you realize that in medicine, for example, there are 4 levels or 4 layers of how to read it, and that I will link it then with architecture. So there is some type of medicine that is like materialistic medicine that assumes that we are only chemical bonds, that we're just a physical cellular bond. Then there is another layer of medicine, which is more subtle, which has to do with the electromagnetic field of the body, and take into consideration not only drugs, but also takes into consideration the electromagnetic field. And there you have acupuncture, you have, like all this massage that tries to stimulate different parts of the electromagnetic body. You have plasma fields, you have, color therapy, etc., etc. So it's more subtle, has to do with that level, with the electromagnetic level. And then you have another level, which is even more subtle, which is the gravitational level of medicine, that it's not, of course, it's more subtle, so you cannot physically sometimes measure it so easy. You can have homeopathy, for example. Homeopathy, some dilutions are so high that there is no chemical trait of it, even though it works. And then the last level is consciousness by itself. The same thing applies to architecture. in these other levels. So what type of architecture we are doing? You can do a material type of architecture that you are only addressing the physical needs of someone. You can do an electromagnetic level. You can take into consideration that level. You can do even a more subtle level. For example, a temple is a place that gathers, or the whole idea is to create gravitational fields. So it's more subtle, it's for other function. And then, of course, you can have the extreme level of consciousness by itself. So this has to do with the research that we've been doing, and many other researchers have been doing, of how geometry can affect reality, what I was saying at the beginning. So, because this can be a very crazy idea, like if someone that now is listening to us, if you stop a little bit to think about it, it may sound very crazy. But through experiments, through trial and error, we concluded that actually it affects, because we were checking the heart rate variability, we were checking the resonance in the hemispheres, and it was actually affecting. Now, it took a lot of years to decode how this actually works, in a more scientific, rigorous method, like how this is happening. But we're having the experience of it. We're having the experience of geometry by itself affecting. And then we're doing a lot of experiments, like what happens if I have different types of rocks, and I just put closer to a person different types of rocks or plants or minerals or anything. And we were actually seeing that the heart rate variability and the coherence of the heart was changing just for putting a piece of material close to the body. So then, with this information and with this wisdom, we apply it to architecture. Like, it's not the same to live in an all metal building full of electrosmog and glass than to live in a grounded building made of clay. And it has completely other result regarding the electromagnetic fields, not only the physical fields, because you can say, okay, physically speaking, it's the same space, but in the subtle energies, it's not. And also the geometries it has, like it's not the same living in a circular space or in a rectangular space or in a pentagon space, etc., etc. And the other question we have is why we end up mainly living in boxes and only using 90 degrees. Why we don't live in pentagons or in hexagons or in something different? Where does this come from? So that's a question that I made to myself, that actually it's in one of the books. I replied in one of the books, like what I think can be a possibility. But what we have seen is that nature is the most important teacher of all. And thanks, we're very, very happy that nowadays architecture is moving towards more biophilic design, towards more, more free flow designs. And this has to do with the question you made about biogeometry. Biogeometry comes from the question of how only geometry made of plastic or wood can actually help to improve the harmonics of the space.
That's actually very interesting that you're mentioning how geometry kind of affects people and what impact it has, because that also sort of makes a circle then with the first 4D talk that I did, which was about senses. I did it with Charles Spence. He's a professor researching on sensorial experiences. And one of the conclusions that he made at some point was that in round spaces, or when you're surrounded by round elements, you might taste foods in different way, like it might be sweeter, for example. And so even though your starting point is somewhere else, the conclusion is basically the same, that however we look at the whole topic, the space around us has a huge impact on us, either in a electromagnetic way or in a sensorial way. But I think you mentioned is the biophilic design, which I think is becoming more and more popular. Actually, it seems like now it's this sexy word that everyone's using and everyone's trying to design biophilic spaces, but that also seems to sometimes be overused. Like we're also unfortunately dealing here with a bit of greenwashing. Like if there is a green carpet and we say green carpet is then trying to mimic grass meadows, this is not the biophilic design that you are trying to stand behind, right? It's more about using natural materials and having as much access to also elements of nature, like also natural light, water, and so on, right?
Yes. Nowadays, like with design, trying to go more organic, which we think it's something that should be done. But we're not talking about putting green carpets, plastic green carpets. No, this has to do with.
But it's recycled. It's recycled, so it's already better.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because electromagnetically speaking, and it's again with these 4 levels. So in the material, physical world, yes, maybe you're changing, you're recycling it, whatever, and it may have some properties in terms of how it will absorb heat or how it will help diminish the rebound of sound, etc. But in terms of the health issue, in terms of how it can help someone to get better, it will not be, absolutely no. Like there are many experiments that they were doing of people that were in a hospital, and in these hospitals there were some beds that were closer to the ocean. So because of the negative ions of the ocean, naturally the ocean produces negative ions because of the water when it's turning against the sun. They were healing faster. This negative ion, eventually, it was more popularized, and they started incorporating negative ions inside places.
I wanted to add something also. I have seen a long time ago when I did a master's in sustainable environmental design. At that time, the greatest fashion in architecture at the time was like, as you said, like green architecture and sustainability and all that. And I have seen that the last few years, the trend has gone from green and sustainable to wellness. So now it's even more in fashion to create spaces that are for wellness, like the space itself supports your wellness. I'm not talking about spas. I'm just talking about any function buildings that can support wellness. And as any other fashion, fashions in general have the nice side of them and let's say the kind of fake side, but at least it gives like a direction towards something that is important to be taken into consideration in architectural design, which is wellness. It's to feel good and be good, and physically, emotionally, electromagnetically, spiritually. And we have, I think, the responsibility as architects to design for the wellness of the people that will use the building, but also the wellness of the land and the plant, the animal kingdom, and for the decades and centuries to come.
And to be honest, I couldn't really imagine a better conclusion of this talk, because that's not just our power, it's also our responsibility. Thank you so much for the talk. It was fascinating and very inspiring.
Thank you so much, Magda.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. To avoid the fear of missing out, make sure you follow 4D Brainstorm here and on the other social media platforms like Instagram and LinkedIn. If you want to share your thoughts on this topic or would like to know how exactly this fourth dimension could be implemented in your design, just simply send an email to 4dbrainstorm@gmail.com. I'm really looking forward to exploring it further with you. Last but not least, if you're interested to know more about what I do, you can also check out the website 4dbrainstorm.com. a platform for free brainstorming in all dimensions and fields. Join the brainstorm and let's discover the fourth dimension together. Till next time!